Hello, Bill.
Hello, Matt.
Welcome back from your vacation. I know you like to take time away from the DMZ, and so we are honored that you decided to join us today.
The DMZ is, a political utopia. This is my weekly vacation. I spend last week with my family, so that's not necessarily a vacation per se.
Well, speaking of family, maybe we should tease it now. If all goes well, next week we'll have a very special DMZ where I will take a vacation, and my lovely wife, Erin, will be in the DMZ with you, Bill, talking about Mother's Day and parenting and being a mom and all that fun stuff.
I think that there's a whole lot of intra-liberal squabbling over families and parenting. And you and I talk about parenting stuff sometimes, but I actually don't have a full grasp of the conservative parenting world, if they have the same types of debates and discussions the left has. So I'm actually very interested to see Erin's take on all this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that she's tied into any sort of conservative parenting movement, but she is to the right of Attila the Hun, never mind myself. And but when it comes to these issues, she is, for example, she's very concerned about the formula companies, the baby formula companies, who are sort of pushing mothers to quit breastfeeding early to drive up profits, and especially in the developing world where there are problems with the water, and breastfeeding would be much safer and healthier. So, not something you might expect to come from a hardcore conservative. But
you guys are, every time I talk, you guys get hippier every week.
Crunchy.
Every week, I feel like you're more and more left.
And
then you come out with this article in the week saying that you'll never be a liberal. It makes no sense to me.
I will never.
Get it.
Yeah, well, it's a good segue, Bill. I will never be a liberal. And I think this speaks to a couple things. That's my latest column in the week, why I won't be a liberal. And I think it speaks to a couple things. But one is that, first of all, I don't believe that either side is perfect. My worldview is that we live in a fallen world, and that all we can do is try to make the best of it. We'll never have a utopia on Earth. Which in itself, the fact that I believe that, the fact that my worldview is we can't perfect humanity, sets me apart from some on the left. But having said that, when I sort of game out, like, what if the people on the right or the people on the left got carte blanche authority, which is a horrifying, scary notion. As you know, our founding fathers pit, interest against interest, and created this adversarial system in many ways, not just within the branches of government itself, but within ideologies and parties which quickly formed, despite Washington's admonition against them. So my point though is that when I sort of game out, like, what if the left could do whatever they wanted, and their worst impulses, thinking they could get away with it, versus what if the right got away with what they would want to do. I'm not happy either way, but I think I'm much more fearful of the left. And so, yes, I believe conservatism is best for a virtuous society. Yes, I believe that conservatism is best for humanity. But more than that, I'm really afraid of the left. It's fine when they are on their best behavior because of our electoral system, but given their druthers, it's frightening.
Well, I feel what you're saying there is that you're more afraid of the farthest left fringe than you are of the farthest right fringe.
Probably. I think that's probably true, though.
Well, not to distort your words. You come at it from the standpoint of, the farthest fringes are equivalent to the purest form, what they would do if they were not otherwise restrained.
Yeah, and I think, but I was to say realistically do. I mean, you could argue like the far right or the far left, but I think that within I certainly don't want to put this on all liberals, but within the respected coalition of the left, there are or have been, communist sympathizers, people who have, thought the Soviet Union had it right. Now you could argue on the right that there were people who have turned a blind eye to equally horrible regimes, but I sense, my sense is, and my worldview is that the left is a little more dangerous in that regard.
Well, I think that there have been long-standing fights within the left over these exact questions. And there is just as much as William Buckley had to kind of discredit the John Birchers to save conservatism, there are aspects of the left that were trying to expunge the communists. Particularly in the 30s, 40s, 50s, when it was sort of in its heyday, I think the mainstream left won that battle. There is no significant communist presence in the left these days. I
agree with you on that, but I think that some of the instincts are still there. For example, buttressing communism is a belief in that you can sort of, perfect humanity by social engineering, and how there's a sense that government knows better than the hoi polloi, how to raise children. Of course, obliquely referencing the MSNBC Lean Forward commercial we talked about a couple weeks ago. And I think there's also an atheism, which I think at the micro level is not problematic at all. I mean, there are plenty of people who are very good people who are not believers of any faith. But at the macro...
conservative atheists, I'm sure.
I'm sure there are. At the macro level, though, Bill, it strikes me that when a society, when a culture, when a political regime specifically pushes atheism, they become God. The goal is for them to sort of take that place, and all sorts of bad things arise out of that. Now, you could argue a religion, the Crusades and radical Islam, a religion's bad too. I would stack up Stalin's and Mao's record of atrocities, though, I think, against almost anything else that's happened in recent history.
I think your bigger concern here, before folks charge you with being a Christianist who wants to impose a biblical worldview on everybody, which I don't believe is what you're talking about. I think your deeper concern is a government without a moral underpinning of any sort. And as a non-believer, to speak for my fellow non-believers, most of us don't see ourselves as amoral, just that we see a morality that's not based in a specific God. And you could certainly have a moral government that did not have an explicit religious basis to it.
Right, and I mean, obviously, we have, separation of church and state here, but I do believe, and we should talk about this, Bill, because there are plenty of people who are atheists or agnostic who are really good people and well behaved. I just don't understand why they would be. Because if you believe that there is an afterlife, regardless of your denomination or your religious affiliation, but if you believe that there's an afterlife, then you have a purpose on this life. You have a mission, ostensibly, on this life, and maybe that's helping other people, maybe that's converting people, whatever. But you'll be held account for your actions on this life and the afterlife. But Bill, if you don't believe that, if you think you just have 60 or 70 years here, why wouldn't you? And then if there's nothing after, why wouldn't you just be greedy here? Make as much as you can here, have as many women as you can have here, have as much fun as you can have here, and with no fear that greed or lust or whatever, murder even, will matter because you're just going to be dust in the afterlife. Why is any moral more moral than the next if there's no objective morality? Deep thoughts here.
Well, we I mean, we can have the big metaphysical discussion here if you want. I do, which I'm happy to have. I do think. Well, I'll answer your question directly. I think there are many ways individuals are held to account in this life. So putting aside the question whether sort of is humankind sort of naturally good or bad, what our impulses are. That's a complicated question. But even if you don't believe that sort of mankind is inherently good, bad things happen to you if you kill somebody. Bad things happen to you if you are unable to maintain stable relationships. Bad things happen to you if you're utterly selfish all the time and don't care about the well-being of others. So I think there's lots. Some of those constraints are natural parts of society. Some of those constraints we do through laws to establish a sense of societal parameters. I think there's a reason why the nation's non-believer populace are not a band of criminals scorching the countryside.
Right. Well, I hear you, and you make some valid points, and I believe that too. I mean, clearly, actions have consequences here in this life. But I think that when we talk about political issues is where this becomes really relevant to me, and it's kind of what, getting back to my piece, is, for example, say like abortion, or even for that matter, euthanasia. If you have a worldview that says life is precious, we're created in the image of God, yada, 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 you may decide to treat the unborn or the elderly, the affirmed, whatever, in a more compassionate way. On the other hand, if you don't have that, pressing, that sort of, I don't even know what I'm thinking, philosophy, worldview, then all of a sudden, well, but what's going to be good for me or society? I mean, we could argue that if my child has some development disorders, maybe we're better off not having that child. Or if an old person is becoming problematic, look, we know we spend, in terms of healthcare costs, Bill, we spend almost everything goes in the last year or two where you're really kind of useless. You're not really contributing to society. We could save a lot of money and treat younger people better, give them better health care. So when it comes to policy decisions, and it's not necessarily clear, Bill, if that's good or bad. This isn't lying or cheating. I mean, you could say it's murder, but it's a fetus. I mean, so I do think that there are there start to become these very big, serious decisions that regimes that tend to be atheist regimes find a way of imposing.
I mean, I would never assume. I mean, you would never go left on abortion, obviously. That's sort of the one issue on the left, where the left takes a libertarian stance that you can do what you want, the government shouldn't get in your way. I could well see someone with. I mean, there do exist, pro-life liberals. They are.
Right.
They're not huge in numbers.
Well,
but they do exist.
Kirsten Powers, Melinda Hindenburger. I mean, we've seen a couple of them who have been prominent speaking out at the gospel, about the gospel trial. So yeah, they do exist in nature.
I mean, because there is an inherent conflict between a belief in an active role of government. And believing the government should ban abortions because life begins at conception. I mean, there is an inherent disconnect there.
Well, Bill, you're exactly right. I mean, these coalitions. I mean, in other parts of the world, it is the liberals who are the anti-abortion party, and it could have happened that way, possibly here in America. I mean, you could imagine a coalition forming. I think our political coalitions are coming apart. The Republican coalition is in danger of coming apart at the seams. We've talked about it. We're going to talk about it later on foreign policy, but to preface. I mean, what if there was this study that came out, and my colleague Neil Monroe wrote about it here at the Daily Caller, that if Romney had the same voter turnout this time that Republicans had in 2004, he would have won. But working class white voters just didn't turn out for Romney, and maybe for a variety of reasons, including they were turned off by by him being a rich, sort of stereotypical rich elite guy. But let's say that the Republican Party embraces immigration reform as I want them to. It's possible that there could be this sort of group of populist, red state folks who are worried about their jobs. They're worried about immigrants taking their jobs. They're worried about the culture changing around them, and they're sort of like a Mike Huckabee voter who's like pro-life but wants government to take care of them. I mean, that's not an unrealistic. There is that guy out there who is like a union member and a hunter, goes to church every week, but wants government to give him Social Security. And so, yeah, there is room in this world for that guy too.
And you hold some heterodox positions like that, but what you're ultimately saying is you wouldn't change your uniform. You might break ranks from time to time, but you look in the dark abyss of the liberal soul and say, I can't be on that team.
Yeah, it's a deal breaker. That's a deal breaker for me.
So what I find interesting about this, and I don't think this is your path, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel there are a number of notable conservatives who claim to have once had more liberal leanings, or maybe just were more apolitical, and then had kind of a bad run-in with the left. I feel like with modern conservatives, usually in college, where liberals are at their most annoying. I will grant you that. By the biggest example of this is Reagan himself. Reagan, who tangled with, he was an active liberal for his younger years, in his 20s and 30s. He was trying to he's trying to head up a number of liberal organizations in Hollywood, but he kept having these tangles with communists who are trying to take over these organizations, and that seemed to soured him so much that it pushed him over to the right. But it wasn't the sole reason, but it's a big one. But I think my friend Michelle Malkin had a bad experience at where I went to college at Oberlin. David Brock, who came back to the left, but he wrote in his memoir how his time at Berkeley kind of turned him off to the left.
But you went to Oberlin? Malkin went to Oberlin? Right. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So that's where that's where Lena Dunham went, right? That's like the liberal Ohio. Yes. I didn't know that. Okay. How did we not? Right. I'm sure we talked about it before. I somehow missed that.
Well, and she went there for the music school, so she didn't go there to be around a bunch of hippies. So she recalled what she got there. But I think there are other folks who go to just your regular uppity school and comes across a lot of left wing excess, and they get turned off by it. So I get being turned off by the excess. What I find stranger to comprehend is because I was turned off by it too, and I had lots of scrapes when I was in college, but it didn't make me completely abandon every liberal thought that I had. It didn't make me want to change teams. It just made me realize that not everyone on my team is the sweetest. So why it seems to, for at least some conservatives, to abandon all liberalism forever because it had some bad run-ins, I had never fully gotten my arms around.
Right. A few things. One, I would say that I think I have changed in recent years. I think I've become less. I still have some libertarian strains, but I think having kids, has made me less libertarian and more communitarian, conservative, because if you don't have kids, and Bill, this sort of goes back to my point about if I didn't think that there was a God to judge me, my life, I would not be as good as you. I can tell you that right now. And I think that having kids, sort of similarly puts things in perspective. If I didn't have kids, I would look at it as, well, look, it doesn't matter really how bad the world gets, because how bad could it get? I'm only going to live another 40 or 50 years at best, unless the robot thing happens. Like, I'm kind of rooting on that with Dr. Sheldon Cooper. But I can make it for another 40 or 50 years, and I can have some fun. And I'm a big boy. I'll survive. I'll find a way to survive. But once you have kids and you start, now all of a sudden, the survival of Western civilization matters. Like, it's not just, it's not just me. It's what is their world going to be like? And this is such a cliche that politicians exploit all the time, but it's actually true. It does change your perspective. And so I think it has changed me. In terms of the personal experiences, well, first of all, Bill, you're one of the best people I know. And if every liberal were like you, I would have no problems with them.
Appreciate that. And
I can say that, like, my experience with liberals is generally better than my experience with conservatives. I mean, because in the past couple years, the big topic has been, in my opinion, for the last couple years, has been conservatives need to do some soul searching. The Republican Party's obviously having problems. So I've been focused in many ways doing this navel gazing and this soul searching, and that does not win a lot of friends amongst conservatives. They would much rather you just talk about how horrible Obama is. Now, to me, it's boring. I know Obama's horrible. You don't have to convince me of that. And it would be quite boring of me to do nothing but point out how bad Obama is, because to me that's a given. And I do some of that, but I don't do a lot because it bores me, and I'm much more interested in saving conservatism and in sort of figuring out where does it go in the 21st century. But that sort of soul-searching and introspection is frowned upon. And so if I were basing my beliefs based on who's been the meanest to me and who's been the nicest to me, I would become a liberal, because conservatives have been much meaner to me, I would say. But again, no matter how you slice it, I can't get past the fact that I believe that conservatism is the best, in a failed world, it's the best philosophy to bring about a virtuous and a good society, and that liberalism, or at least the hard left part of liberalism, scares the hell out of me. And so,
well, I think it's really healthy for you to recognize that just because, so if someone's being a jerk to you, doesn't mean you should change your entire worldview. It just means they're being a jerk.
Well, and I argue, we've talked about it before, I argue that in many cases they're actually not conservative. What they call conservative is really not conservative.
But I think there are these sorts of social pressures in professional politics. And in many ways, Washington is like a big high school. It's like you're in a big giant clique, and here you are trying to, speak your own mind and offer some constructive criticism, and the clique doesn't want to hear it. I think that's true on both sides of the fence. That's just sort of, and there's this constant fear and insecurity that if you dare publicly speak up and say, hey, maybe we should talk about this in a little bit of a different way, that you're giving ammunition to the other side,
right,
and you're being a troll.
And don't get me wrong, I do believe that there are people who have made careers out of providing the other side with fodder. Of even the conservative so and so says this. I mean, if your entire oeuvre is based on criticizing your own side, it does call into question, there's a sincere introspection where your goal is really to advance the cause. And then there is such a thing as a sellout. I mean, I don't think that there's not, but I think that sometimes the distinction's not made.
Well, I mean, are you actively trying to give constructive advice, or you're just trying to be a professional contrarian to get on TV? I mean, that's
right.
That's a subjective call, but everyone's very quick to lump the former into the latter out of fear that you saying something against the grain is going to be used by the other side.
Yeah, and I do think that I am somewhat a contrarian. Hopefully not an attempt solely to get publicity. But Bill, my favorite line, I do have to say it, is from the late Christopher Hitchens. You might know this story. Someone came up to him and said, I tried to give my son your book, Letters to a Young Contrarian, with the hopes that he would become a contrarian, but he refused. So, what a good.
Now, if I may segue again.
Yes.
So you mentioned that your relatively new role as a parent has made you less libertarian and more communitarian.
I think so.
But your party, and I have a piece that should be published on theweek.com's website I think on Thursday. Why Rand Paul could be the next and last Republican nominee, someone who has a very particular brand of libertarianism. Certainly, you would not call Rand a communitarian. I think the bigger fault line bigger rift he's going to cause if he was the nominee would be on foreign policy and national security. And I mean, he has said, he just gave a big speech at Heritage calling for a reluctant and restrained foreign policy. He said he agreed with the notion that Western occupation fuels the flames of radical Islam. He previously penned an op-ed with 2 Democratic senators, this was in 2011, calling for a more rapid withdrawal from Afghanistan, fully out by end of 2012, which obviously we didn't do, although we're on track to get out next year. And he even called aid to Israel a form of welfare. So these are some pretty big breaks from traditional Republican foreign policy. And John McCain is out there actively pushing hard against this. He's even said recently that sometimes he feels closer to President Obama than some people in his own party when it comes to foreign policy. So Rand, I think, could get, if you look at the polling numbers, he's leading in one New Hampshire poll. He's a close second in a national poll. Obviously, it's very early. These numbers can move around a lot. I'm not saying it's predictive, but it at least shows you the scenario where he could win, which is specifically the establishment splinters between Rubio, Christie, Jeb Bush, Paul Ryan, and Rand locks up the farthest right of the base, and he gets in with a plurality. And I think that's the scenario where he would get it. But if he gets it, does he drive this wedge between him and the national security right? Does he break the 3-legged stool? The national security conservatives go away. Does it go as far as McCain endorses Hillary, because Hillary is shown to be fairly aggressive when it comes to foreign policy? Does McCain or someone else go bull moose and actually do a third party? In the most apocalyptic scenario is in a Whig style scenario, the Whigs who came together to oppose Andrew Jackson's Democrats. 15 years later, the slavery issue tears them apart and they just disintegrate and scrub in different camps. Do the Paulites just go back to libertarians? Do the McCainites form their new national security base of conservative party? And there's no Republican Party anymore. I wouldn't say that's even a certainty, but I think the divide that Paul would force between him and a big chunk of his party would be a pretty big divide that's not so easy to paper over.
Well, first, Bill, let me congratulate you on a great column idea. It combines, as someone who does this, for a living, it combines a sort of it's a new idea that hasn't been beat to death. It is really sexy and controversial, and it has the added benefit of being somewhat plausible. So, so I commend you on that. I agree. I'm not predicting that it's going to happen, but this is not an absurd idea. It's not absurd to think that Rand Paul could win a Republican primary, and it's not absurd to think that it could cause this splinter where, really, fundamentally, this is this speaks to the modern conservative movement, and Rand Paul being, a paleo conservative in some ways, and the party being much more neoconservative in recent decades. And so it used to be that the Republican Party was very anti-interventionist, and so it's not crazy to think that could happen again. It used to be that the Democratic Party was the party that promised to bear any burden and pay any price. It's not absurd that could be part of the coalition again. And if you think about it, we've talked a lot about these fundamental worldviews and ideas. Is it crazy to think that the party who believes in big government, the party that believes that they can create a utopia, would also be the party who thinks they can use the military to do it? In some ways, you could certainly argue that an aggressive foreign policy, a robust foreign policy, belongs on the left. Obviously in the 60s, in the wake of the Vietnam era, the radical left turned against the military. But it was Kennedy and McNamara and Johnson who got us in that and escalated it. So
it was Bob Dole that lashed out at the Democrat wars,
right,
in the '76 campaign.
Let me just say, until George W. Bush sort of, and maybe his dad too messed it up a little bit, and you could argue for the right or wrong reasons, but it was a really good talking point that I enjoyed for a long, long time as a kid and as a student and as a libertarian-leaning conservative, to be able to talk about how the Democrats got us in all the wars. That was a very convenient line that I exploited for a long time, and it's much, you can't really pull it off anymore. So no, there's something to it, Bill. But it's a great column idea, and I look forward to reading it at the week.
Now, so to bring us back to you, how would a communitarian conservative stay within a party headed by, the nation's most prominent libertarian?
Well, it would be interesting. Remember in the 60s and the 70s, the neoconservatives, who, that word has become almost meaningless today. It basically means people who are foreign policy interventionists. But it originally was primarily Jewish intellectuals who had been of the left, in some cases Trotskyites, who saw, and it was also in many ways domestic, that they're mugged by reality, so to speak, and they saw that the left wasn't handling law and order, and so they moved over to the Republican side. And you could imagine them if Hillary Clinton. Here's the question: I think that for this to work, now first of all, you got to give Barack Obama credit. The killing bin Laden is a necessary ingredient in this step. It's easy to overlook it, but he began the movement whereby the Democratic Party isn't automatically dismissed in terms of being strong on foreign policy. If he had botched that, you can talk about Benghazi, but if he had botched the raid, if the helicopters had gone down, he would have maybe cemented this stereotype that Democrats are weak on foreign policy. So you got to give Obama credit. But the other thing that's necessary for this to happen, it's not enough. I don't think it's enough for Rand Paul to be the nominee, as important and as concerning as that may be for many conservatives. But I think you also need Hillary to exploit this. You need Hillary to be the Hillary that she was in 2008 when she talked about the 3 a.m. phone call. You need Hillary to become a scoop Jackson Democrat who plays up her experience as Secretary of State to become a war hawk. And the question is, would she do that? Can she get away with that on the left? Because while the Republican Party may be struggling to keep the Reagan coalition, the three-legged stool, together, The Democrats have different incentives. They've won elections. They have no existential crisis. So why would Hillary want to do anything that would anger other parts of the coalition? So I'll ask you, Bill, you know the left better than I do. Would she be able would she exploit it enough to pull Bill Kristol and John McCain into her camp?
I think, well, at minimum, I think Hillary can be very agile on this point because she, Iraq's in the rear view. I don't think that is an albatross for her anymore the way it was in 2008 because the party in 2008 was so viscerally against Iraq that vote was a very hard thing to overcome. But that's under the bridge now. She can rightly claim playing a major role in the Libya intervention, pulling the international community together behind a UN resolution, getting Russia's acquiescence, and that was kind of the quintessential liberal intervention. UN-backed, humanitarian goal, no crude, literally or figuratively, national interest, and it went off without a hitch with no American casualties. So she has that under her belt, that card to play, regardless of what the backdrop is in 2016. The big wild card here it would appear to be Syria, where you don't know how Obama's handling of it is going to look 3 years from now. We don't know, how to what degree he's going to intervene in Syria yet. We do know that Hillary wanted to arm the resistance quicker than Obama did. So if things go badly for whatever reason, she can argue, well, I argued something different at the time, so that you can't blame me for that. If Syria resolves itself, then it's just a non-issue. If Obama goes in more significantly militarily, probably not with troops on the ground, but other kinds of assistance, Hillary could say, well, that's what I was calling for. And if it works, she can claim being correct early. If Obama goes in, it's a big disaster. If it's Iraq redux, then Hillary's in a much tougher position. Then the Democratic Party, stays in its very firm anti-war mode, doubly scarred after Iraq, and that would put Paul in actually a very strong position to say, I'm not going to do stuff like this anymore.
The other point, Bill, is Republicans when Hillary Clinton was pushed aside in 2008, Republicans tried to capitalize on that by picking a female candidate who could appeal to some of the same blue-collar worker. It didn't really work, but it was an attempt to exploit that schism, and it didn't work. And I think that there's an incentive for both parties to avoid breaking up their coalitions. And so here's the other question. Let's suppose Rand Paul becomes the nominee. In the process of doing, which I'm not predicting, I think it's unlikely, but not absurd, not unspeakable. In the unlikely event that he does that, might he have to change positions in debates and become more of a mainstream, what today we call mainstream conservative? And then, in order to keep the party together, to keep this schism from happening, to keep the John McCains and Lindsey Grahams and Bill Kristols of the world from going to Hillary, does he have to pick Marco Rubio or someone as his running mate? Does he have to bring in advisors who are neocon advisors or whatnot? In other words, I think in order for this worst case scenario to play out, there are many variables and many factors. Rand Paul has to win being Rand Paul, and he has to stand on principle for his non-interventionist positions without trying to unite the party and balance the ticket. And then Hillary also has to exploit it. And so, again, not saying it couldn't happen, but I do think that there are many pieces that would have to fall in place. And then if it happened, it's not just a one-time thing, right? You could eventually see that the parties then and the coalitions would possibly shift going forward.
Well, I agree that one of the reasons why Rand, I think, has a shot at this is that he recognizes some need to sand off the rough edges of the ideological rhetoric in a way that his father always refused to do. I don't see a lot of evidence that he recalibrates the positions, but how he talks about it, at least there are attempts to talk about it differently. When he spoke to Heritage, he went to great pains to say that he's not an isolationist, that he's a realist, and he tried to juxtapose some of the more Ron Paul style lines, like Western occupation fuels radical Islam, with another line saying we can't ignore radical Islam. We can't just assume that if we put our heads in the sand, they'll just go away. So he's very bluntly trying to balance both wings of the party. And to that end, I would not be surprised if, very much like Ronald Reagan when he got the nomination, felt he had to do something to bring the more moderate Republicans into the fold, first reaching out to Gerald Ford as VP, even offering him a quote-unquote co-presidency. Well,
I don't think...
Then settling on George...
I don't think Reagan offered him that, but I think that's what... that's what Ford wanted, I think, or Ford's people wanted. I could be wrong, but I think that's...
I take your knowledge on that. I defer to your knowledge. But it sort of was talked about having him be VP.
It was discussed. At the convention.
But then with George W. Bush, who at that point was a pro-choice Republican,
and very quickly changed positions on that.
yes. Yeah, he also was sometimes very willing to to political necessity. So I would totally see. Whereas Ron Paul might never ever in a million years pick an establishment Republican as his VP. Rand, I think, would. Well,
and don't forget, Rand Paul endorsed Mitt Romney for president at some point, and he has endorsed Mitch McConnell for U.S. Senate. So he's not above being a smart politician.
Right. I just find he has that degree of pragmatism, but I feel that there's a bit still of a constitutional incapability to totally filter himself. Like calling aid to Israel welfare is just totally unnecessary, there's even if you're going to be against foreign aid, like there are clearly more politically sensitive ways to talk about it. He just can't stop himself sometimes.
I'm not, it does open itself up to ridicule, but if you're trying to make the case on the right against aid to Israel, that's the way to do it. To say,
I'm betting Sheldon Adelson doesn't see it that way.
Okay, it's probably true.
There'll be a whole lot of donor money that does not come Rand Paul's way for talking about stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, should we leave it there, Bill? I think we've teased my column for the week, your column for the week. That's what this show's become. So, just joking. I think we talked about other stuff too, but it was good. Good stuff. As always, glad. This will be the only time. So last week, Justin Green filled in. Thank you, Justin, for doing that. And next week, if all goes well, according to plan, I will be not here. So,
what are you going to do while you're away? We got a free day.
I may read a book. I may do something really radical. like remember that time George Costanza said, "This summer of George." This summer he was actually going to read a book. So I'm going to read a book.
Well, I look forward to talking to your significant other next week. And I'll talk to you again too.
See you in the DMZ. Thanks.